Seriously, marrying you was a huge mistake. A wife who can't cook is a failure. That's what my husband, Ken, says as he scolds me. Seemingly very happy about it. If I'm a failure as a wife, then you're a failure as a human being, aren't you? Who do you think made that meal? Are you ready? The time has come for you to fall into hell, my dear. My name is Holly. 38 years old. I used to hate my name when I was a child, but now, I feel like I've grown quite fond of it. This story is from when I had just gotten married and was still new in terms of being a wife. Back then, I was in my 20s. Ken, my older husband, and I had just gotten married, though it had been about 2 years. During our honeymoon phase, we were still careful with each other, so there weren't any troubles. But, I guess we got too comfortable. From this point on, I started to get irritated with Ken more frequently with again. Ken was in sales at a certain company, and his department had a lot of meetings. And lots of dinner or parties with clients. The workplace itself was a bit unique. If someone didn't participate in the dinner and parties, they would be labeled as a non-team player and a loser. I knew about this even before we got married because Ken told me, and I thought it was part of his job, so I didn't mind. As long as he told me in advance, it was fine. Then, I wouldn't need to make dinner for him, and I could go to sleep without waiting for him to come back. Having a night to myself once in a while isn't too bad, right? That's why we had made a promise to always contact each other if we couldn't come home. However, Ken gradually started going out without contacting me. Ken, who was in his 20s when we first married and now in his 30s, seemed to get drunk more easily. There were nights he would come home drunk as a skunk, lying face down at the entrance, or laughing loudly by himself. Because of this, I couldn't get a good night's sleep. The wasted effort of making dinner he wouldn't eat increased, and there were nights I waited up for him until late. I eventually stopped making elaborate dinners, and if he didn't come home by 10 p.m., I would just go back to our bedroom. It would be one thing if he felt bad about not contacting me. But there wasn't even a hint of remorse. When I asked him, "Why didn't you contact me?" he would stubbornly say, "I was too busy and forgot." It's bad enough it happened once, but he would forget again in the same week I reminded him, which is just infuriating. It seemed like he had no intention of changing his behavior. It felt like he thought he could do whatever he wanted because I would always be there. But, if I could overlook that, our relationship was actually very good. Even after 2 years of marriage, we would always go on dates if we had the time, and there was never a lack of conversation when we were together. He would help with chores on his days off, and he would always take a day off to celebrate my birthday. I knew there were more good points than bad, and it was fun being together. So, I thought, it's natural for some issues to come up when you spend a lot of time together, and continued our life as usual. That was until we had a child. After we started raising kids, our relationship changed drastically. And not for the better. With me exhausted from childcare, Ken would leave things out everywhere. And yet, why is the house so messy? You can't use childcare as an excuse to slack off on the housework. Shut up. You're the one who made the mess. The problems didn't stop there. One day, we took our child to a food court at a nearby mall. Man, food courts are exciting no matter how old you get. I'm gonna have a steak. Excuse me? The steak place Ken wanted to eat at had a long line. We have a kid with us. Are you seriously planning to wait in that line? Really? Anyone who has raised a small child knows they can't wait for long. Sure, some kids are quiet and can wait, but our little hungry monster will start crying if they get too hungry. On top of that, I wasn't happy about the steak choice. Our child is just 3 years old. Naturally, they can't finish a full serving at a restaurant. Usually, we'd pick something like pasta, which I can share with them at a diner. Yet, choosing steak makes me think he didn't consider our child at all. I wonder if some men just don't get it unless it's pointed out to them. Since becoming a mother, there's been a big divide in how my husband, Ken, and I think. Trying to get our picky eater to have some vegetables leads to Ken scolding me, saying, "Don't force the kid too much." And if I scold our child for running around without drying off after a bath, Ken laughs and says, "You were ranting about me leaving things messy, but lately, you've been getting irritated too easily." I'm just trying to prevent our child, who has low immunity, from catching a cold. Yet, I'm not lashing out at our child, but Ken starts calling me a monster mom. Defending our child, he'd say, "Look, the monster mom is getting angry again." Scary, Huff, making our child join in with, "Monster mom is scary." Real monster moms are nothing like this. I'm still on the nicer side. Around that time, Ken got promoted at work, so the dinner became more the responsibility of his colleagues, and he had more desk work. This meant more family time, which should have been nice, but for me, it just meant more stress. Since his promotion, Ken has been using his tiredness from work as an excuse to do whatever he wants at home. Leaving things messy was the norm, but he also started eating snacks we bought for our child, not properly putting away his laundry, and leaving the fridge slightly open after use. There's no end if I start listing his sloppiness. Before I knew it, I was scolding Ken more than our child. Do we have 2 kids? No, wait, we're supposed to have only 1 child. But Ken, far from reflecting, seemed not to understand why he had to be scolded so much. Each time I scolded him, he frowned unpleasantly. If he doesn't want to be complained at, I wish he'd behave properly. But it seems that thought never got through to him. Instead, he started saying, "You've become colder since we got married." I feel cheated. What? Am I the bad one here? Is there really no fault on Ken's part? I'm not sure if I'm sad or frustrated, but I felt utterly empty. Naturally, this led to arguments with Ken. And after that, Ken started going back to parties more often. I was invited by a colleague, he'd say, but I think he just wanted to avoid getting nagged at home and having to see me. It's sad to think where the gears in our relationship started to misalign, considering how close we were. Even so, I hadn't come to dislike Ken. Perhaps if I had, I might have easily decided on divorce. But I couldn't shake off the thought that Ken wasn't like this originally, he must be able to change. We had a child, and I wanted to go back to being a loving couple. But contrary to my wishes, Ken's attitude grew colder by the day. If I tried to address our child's pickiness with food, he'd retort, "It's because your cooking sucks." When I expressed concern about his frequent drinking for his health, he'd say, "I have to go out because your cooking is bad." I wondered, why am I suddenly being called a bad cook? Have I always been making terrible meals? Was it my seasoning, or had Ken's taste changed? Or maybe, I'm just tone deaf when it comes to taste and have been serving bad food all along. Honestly, I had no idea. I tried various seasonings and probably did go through a phase where my cooking really was terrible. I thought my seasoning was light, but maybe, being tone deaf, I actually made it too strong? Once I started doubting, I couldn't tell anymore what the right seasoning was. Even our child said my cooking was bad, and I just didn't know what to think anymore. It seems there's something like yips in cooking too, just as in sports. Still, I kept experimenting and trying to improve my cooking skills when one day, Ken suddenly brought home about 5 colleagues from work. He said they were going to drink with my homemade meals that night. I hadn't been consulted about this at all. But the colleagues were already set on having dinner at our place, making it impossible to refuse. Fortunately, I had ingredients in the fridge, so I decided to just go ahead and prepare the meal. Watching me, Ken smirked for some reason, which made me feel somewhat uncomfortable as I got the food ready. Cooking for 5 was quite a task, but I managed to serve up some dishes that young men typically enjoy. "What? Your cooking is amazing," exclaimed a colleague after trying the fried chicken. The others also eagerly ate my cooking, saying, "It's really good." Which was a huge relief given the recent accusations of my cooking being terrible. Amidst this, Ken was the only one with a dissatisfied expression. Not at all looking like a husband proud of his wife's cooking achievements. I wondered what was going through his mind. When one of the colleagues said with a smile, "You've been saying your wife's cooking is bad, but this is really good." The others tried to shush him, looking apologetically at me. The speaker covered his mouth as if realizing his mistake. "Thank you, tactless colleague." Seeing this, Ken opened his mouth, displeased. "That's not true. You guys just eat cheap stuff, so you think this is good," he said. "But you also like the same cheap fast food places we do," a colleague inadvertently retorted, earning a glare from Ken. Whether out of pity for the colleague who made the comment or trying to change the subject, another colleague added, "But really, you're a fantastic cook. Professional level, aren't you?" It seemed Ken had been hoping for a "your wife's cooking is bad" comment. The colleague who steered the conversation in the completely opposite direction of what Ken wanted also received a glare from him. The atmosphere at the dinner table became extremely tense. However, the colleague who first mentioned fast food blundered again. "Man, I wish I had a wife like you," he said, "or if my girlfriend can't cook at all, I'd love for her to learn from you," heaping praise on me. My confidence, which had been at an all-time low, was quickly restored thanks to him, but it seemed to upset Ken. Unable to lash out at his colleagues, he yelled at me, "Don't get ahead of yourself," and then just left for the bedroom, leaving his colleagues behind. The colleagues, though taken aback, apologized to me, saying, "Sorry about this. We'll leave now," even though they were only there because Ken invited them. It was regrettable to make them feel uncomfortable due to Ken's actions. Upon asking them, it turned out Ken had been bad-mouthing my cooking at work all along. They had said, "If it's that bad, we might as well try it once," and that's how the dinner at our place was decided. Wanting to make a laughing stock out of me among his colleagues seemed like a terribly cruel thing to do. It's hard to believe there's any love for his wife in such actions. I had believed that with the right trigger, we could return to how we used to be, but now, it seems impossible. It was a night that made me think about what needs to be done moving forward. In the end, Ken went to sleep in the bedroom, sulking, and left for work the next morning without saying a word to me, still in a bad mood. Though his mood seemed to improve by evening, such sudden changes in attitude only made me more upset. "Glad you're feeling better" was not something I could cheerfully think, and I spent the day without speaking to Ken. A few days later, Ken and I were still in a strained relationship, but we made minimal conversation as we headed to his parents' house early in the morning for a family gathering. It was unavoidable. There was a gathering because Ken's cousin had a baby. And it was both a celebration and a family meetup. Similar to when I had our child, Ken's aunt's house hosted a sort of baby shower party. Ken's family lives in the countryside and has many relatives, so these gatherings happen quite often. It's considered more considerate for the relatives to come and go, visiting the baby, than to burden the new mother at her own home. The so-called baby shower was essentially just a party. It was an occasion for the older folks to comfortably enjoy drinking, while the relatively younger women were kept busy serving drinks, hardly having a chance to eat themselves. It was a very rural, outdated kind of gathering. Well, it doesn't happen often, so I've resigned myself to it, but honestly, I didn't want to go. Especially this year. With my relationship with Ken not being great and me being in charge of the cooking. It was particularly daunting. Yet, as a wife, I felt it was my duty to attend the celebration. As the relatives gathered and the party started, an incident occurred. Well, it was more like Ken caused a scene. "What is this? It's inedible. Everything you've made is terrible." After trying just one bite, Ken suddenly exploded in anger. Then, he haphazardly picked up the serving dishes in front of him and threw them into the trash. As the relatives watched in shock, Ken continued to throw the dishes from the table into the garbage can. There were about 30 servings in total. The trash cans were getting filled one after another. "Hey, what are you doing?" Even as I desperately tried to stop him, Ken ignored me. The male relatives also tried to restrain Ken and prevent him from throwing the food into the trash, but he didn't care and kept dumping the serving dishes on the floor. "Great, now I'm embarrassed in front of the whole family gathering." Ken glared at me and spat out those words. "Huh? What are you suddenly going on about? Suddenly? Did you even taste this food? It's unbelievably bad." Really, marrying you was a huge mistake. A wife who can't cook is a failure. Saying so, Ken pointed at me dramatically with his index finger. If this gesture was paired with "the culprit is you," it would be the climax of a suspense drama. Ken must feel so satisfied declaring my cooking terrible in front of all the relatives. The relatives began to agree, saying, "True, this year's dishes are a bit off," and Ken looked pleased, as if to say, "See? I told you so." I spoke up, as if it were the scene in a drama where the motive is revealed. "It's hard to tell you, but..." "What?" "I'll listen to your excuse." Ken, thinking he's right based on the reactions around him, spoke to me in a completely condescending manner. So infuriating. But the time for such complaints is now, or rather, this very moment. Because I am not the culprit who made the terrible food. Emily over there made it. What? As I pointed out, the air froze in an instant. Ken's expression, smug with a satisfied smile, froze as well. Suddenly, the center of everyone's attention, Emily began to frown slightly and then started sobbing heavily. Oh dear. Simon, Ken's brother, tried to console the sobbing Emily. Yes, Emily is Simon's fiancée. Their marriage was set for this summer, and she was almost like a member of the family already, which is why she was invited to this banquet. As the air turned as somber as a wake, a flustered Ken asked me, "What do you mean? Weren't you in charge of cooking this time?" To that, my mother-in-law chimed in from the side, "Emily wanted to learn our family recipes and has been coming over to our house lately to learn cooking, so we let her take charge this time." Ken, mouth agape, asked me, "Then, what did you make?" "I didn't make anything. I just helped with peeling and plating this time." "What?" Ken was at a loss for words, while Emily cried out, "I knew it, even if I practice, I'm just bad at cooking." Simon consoled her, "It's not that you're bad at cooking, it's just about getting used to it. With practice, it'll get better." Yes, Emily was truly bad at cooking. Having lived at home for a long time, she had hardly done any cooking. She's the legendary figure who couldn't even make instant soup properly because she once forgot to press the button to boil the water in an electric kettle. Emily might be a bit silly, but out of genuine interest in learning to cook, she followed my mother-in-law to learn. "Emily, don't cry, I can cook too, it's no big deal." It is a big deal. Simon doesn't understand my feelings at all. Being called bad at cooking by your brother, I want to call off the wedding. Amidst her tearful outburst, Simon tried desperately to calm Emily down. When she went as far as to say she was calling off the wedding, Simon turned his anger towards Ken, the catalyst of this whole situation. "Seriously, stop messing with my fiancé's cooking, you jerk." "No, Simon, I thought that." Poor Emily, she was really trying, you know. Facing the wrath of his brother and the support of the parents for Emily, Ken was completely at a loss and looked towards me, seeking help with a distressed expression. As if he wanted me to throw him a lifeline. As if I would, huh? "You're always saying my cooking is terrible, but can't even tell who made what. Maybe you're the one who's taste challenged?" "No, usually it's much better. Today was just really bad, and..." I can't take this anymore. I'm definitely not getting married. My husband, caught off guard by my comment, and Emily, bursting into tears again, turned the scene into complete chaos. Thinking it was bad, Ken also desperately tried to explain to Emily, "That's not what I meant," but it was too late. Simon, absolutely furious, slapped Ken on the cheek, while my in-laws sighed in disbelief. I felt bad for Emily, but this situation was incredibly advantageous for me. When exactly was the cooking ever good? What? My husband froze at my question. "Did you know I've been serving store-bought ready meals lately?" Huh? He looked at me, completely baffled, to which I smiled back. "What do you mean? It wasn't homemade?" Yep. Why? Because I was tired of being told it was bad. I wanted to see if you really can't taste, or if I'm the one who can't cook. It turns out the answer was clear since you complained even about the ready meals. Don't start with those absurd lies. I can definitely tell the difference between ready meals and homemade food. Oh, really? Should I show you the receipts from when I bought those meals? What? You have them? Of course, I bought them, after all. At this point, my husband fell silent, perhaps realizing the futility. Simon, having listened to the entire conversation, exploded, "Don't drag me into your marital dispute." A perfectly reasonable complaint. Emily, seemingly determined to break off the engagement, placed her engagement ring on the table and continued to sob. Simon, unable to contain his anger towards my husband, mounted him and yelled, "I'll sue you if this leads to a breakup because of you." Though a lawsuit might be impossible or difficult to win due to family disputes, Simon's sentiment was painfully clear. Thus, the parents did not stop Simon, silently watching my husband be overpowered by his brother. It seemed they thought it was well-deserved. The relatives didn't attempt to intervene, seeing it as a self-inflicted situation. My husband looked to me for help, pleading, "Help me," but I only smiled and suggested, "Think of it as a massage and just endure those slaps." Eventually, Simon, realizing he might have gone too far, stopped on his own. My husband was a mess. Even if it was Holly's cooking, a husband shouldn't complain about his wife's cooking, said my father-in-law. My mother-in-law nodded in agreement. What? Even you, Dad, my husband muttered, holding his swelling cheek. Even if it's bad, there's love in that effort. Appreciate that. That doesn't make any sense. Everyone seemed to understand my father-in-law's words except my husband. Well, it's probably inevitable that things have come to this with a husband who doesn't understand the meaning of those words. It's only natural he wouldn't understand. Well, you need to understand that originally, spouses are strangers, my mother-in-law said, looking at my husband as if he were a troublesome child, sighing deeply. Holly, I'm sorry. Our son has caused you so much trouble. No, well, yes, it's been quite hard. Did he at least take care of your child? Not at all. Oh, I'm truly sorry. My mother-in-law apologized profoundly, looking at my child, who was now engrossed in orange juice, saying, "We've wronged that child too. It's not her fault. The blame lies with my husband." I felt almost guilty for receiving so many apologies. Well, I certainly understand your feelings now. What? Confused, my husband looked at me. From now on, you can enjoy delicious fast food every day. What are you trying to say? You don't like my cooking anymore, right? So, you're saying you'll just buy food from now on? That's too irresponsible for a housewife, isn't it? You should at least cook. I'm saying you should buy it yourself. Let's get a divorce. From now on, you can eat whatever you like from fast food or pubs. What? Wait. I just wanted you to apologize, not to divorce. Apologize? Why should I apologize? Because you're always nagging me. And you're too strict with the child. Am I not supposed to point out when you leave everything scattered around? The child will imitate that. Isn't it natural to firmly make a child wear clothes if they run around naked? What if they catch a cold and end up in the hospital? My husband tried to argue back, but my mother-in-law supported me, saying, "You're right to be angry." My father-in-law, the other relatives, and even Simon, who doesn't have kids, were all nodding in agreement. My husband was the only one looking puzzled, as if to say, "Is that how it is?" Just with that one sentence, "It's clear how little you've participated in parenting," said my father-in-law. Well, Holly, you can certainly live on your own. It's been like you were on your own all this time anyway. My mother-in-law seemed to agree with my decision to divorce. I didn't mean for it to be like this, my husband muttered as if talking to himself. No matter what you intended, as your mother-in-law said earlier, spouses are originally strangers to each other. Without empathy and respect, this is what leads to divorce. Just give up. Are you serious? Do you think I'm joking about something like this? I'll contact a lawyer later. Oh, can I borrow your computer to contact them now? Wait, think it over. My husband clung to me desperately, but my in-laws all told him to gracefully accept the situation. After everything that had happened, it was impossible to go back to how things were when we loved each other. Clinging to me so pitifully and begging for an apology was truly comical. Afterward, as I had declared, I prepared the divorce papers, and we successfully divorced. My husband tried several times to convince me to stay by pointing out the benefits of being married to him. Unfortunately for him, a woman's heart isn't swayed by benefits. Love and respect are essential in a marriage, after all. After we divorced, my husband apparently became the subject of behind-the-back talks at his workplace, saying he had such a great wife and treated her terribly, it was only a matter of time before they divorced. This gossip gradually spread among his coworkers, and he became known as cold-hearted, diminishing not just his work but his everyday credibility. While everyone maintained the minimum necessary work-related interactions, he was no longer invited to casual outings or events by his peers. My husband, who once thrived on being admired by others, was completely demoralized by this situation and felt so out of place that he resigned from his job. But the world isn't kind enough for a man over 35 to easily find a new job. He struggled to explain his reason for resigning during interviews and ended up in a job with more work, less pay, and no prospect for promotion compared to before. He's constantly berated by an unreasonable senior and laments, "I shouldn't have left my previous job. I shouldn't have gotten a divorce." You might wonder why I know so much about my ex-husband after we divorced. Actually, I ended up teaching Emily how to cook. Despite initially requesting a breakup, Emily's love for Simon didn't fade. She decided to improve her cooking skills before getting married, and my mother-in-law suggested she might learn from me, even though I was no longer part of the family. Having felt a sense of satisfaction when Simon stood up for me that day, I wanted him to be happy. So, I agreed to help if it meant acting as their Cupid. Therefore, while I have no direct contact with my in-laws, I hear about them and my ex-husband through Emily. I thought I might feel pulled back hearing about my ex. But surprisingly, I didn't feel much of anything. Well, it's probably because it's just too pathetic. Eventually, Emily improved her cooking skills and married Simon. It seems my ex-husband is still not on good terms with anyone in the family, but everyone supports Emily, which is his own doing. As for me, I started sharing my cooking on social media after being constantly told by my ex that I was a bad cook. My following gradually grew, and I even gained many fans. And now, I've just secured a deal to publish a cookbook based on my recipes. Yay! There's also talk of a collaboration menu with a restaurant, making my days busily happy. To be honest, after the divorce, I was anxious about being a single mother. Finding work was tough as a former stay-at-home mom, and I even lost a job because I had to leave early too often due to my child's frequent illnesses. But I always made sure to serve homemade meals, no matter how busy I was. Especially since my child has atopic dermatitis. I continued to incorporate vegetables and additive-free items into our meals, hearing it was good for us. Even when I was deceiving my husband with ready meals, I always made sure to cook the same dishes from scratch for our child. Thanks to my efforts, my child's eczema has almost completely calmed down without the need for medication, and despite my initial struggles, work as a chef started to pick up. They say perseverance pays off, and truly, my hard work has borne fruit. My child, who used to be picky, now dislikes nothing. I'm so glad I persisted. After learning cooking in school home economics classes, my child has become interested in cooking with me. They dream of becoming a good cook like me and opening a restaurant. It's a childlike dream, so whether it will come true, I don't know, but if my child does open their restaurant, I want to be the first customer. I want to continue making delicious, love-filled meals for my child and for my own health. That's what I'm thinking.